This is Hard Parking, sponsored by Right Honda and Right Toyota out of Scottsdale, Arizona. Coming up on today's show, I am joined by composer, producer, arranger, jazz musician, David Diggs. He's been in the game for quite a long time, since the 70s. A lot of great collaborations. Today we get to dig into his life. He's also a car guy, has an NSX. Pretty Little Liars creeps into the conversation, as well as some political transportation-based questions, all that and more coming up after this word from 4Wheel Online. For over a decade, 4Wheel Online has been bringing the best truck accessories and truck parts to enhance the appearance and performance of all trucks and SUVs. They are dedicated to providing an extensive range of upgrades that will match any maker model on the road. The truck products cover everything to give your truck a custom look and added functionality. Need a wheel and tire package? Head over and use the configuration tool. They carry all the major brands of wheels and tires, so go get outfitted today. Visit them online at 4Wheel Online. Mr. David Diggs, fellow car guy, fellow NSX owner, but even cooler than that, he's a musician, a well-published musician who's been doing this for a long time, not to make you feel old or not, but longer than I've been born. So, David, welcome to Hard Parking, man.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here. Yeah.
Excited to have you. So I was poking around a little bit on your profile and just kind of listening to some of the tunes. And I'm like, you know what? This is pretty, and I know we're going to get into it, Billboard, top billboards, but I mean, that's pretty good stuff, man.
Yeah, well, you do it long enough and some things happen for sure. Yeah. Looking back, I can see some of that. At the time, you always wonder, when is this going to happen, my big break or whatever. But yeah, it's been fun for a long time.
So let's because I don't know much about you, and my listeners probably don't as well, but I'd be remiss if I didn't honestly say that by the time they do look you up, you will have some new listeners. So let's kind of go back and talk about your humble beginnings a little bit, and to the point of, when's this going to take off? When's this going to stick? At what point was that in your life?
Well, yeah, I kind of grew up behind what we called the Orange Curtain, which was Orange County, California. Actually, I was all over the place, but at the point that I was really deciding to do music seriously, you had to be in Los Angeles, of course, or New York or Chicago or somewhere. It was a different world than it is now. You couldn't do anything online, so you had to kind of be there with a phone number with the right area code and stuff like that. So I moved to LA in 74, I think. Now that tells you how old I am. But started working there and just you kind of have to hang around and be every place you can, and you get one referral and then another one. And I played, keyboards and studio work and things like that. And then eventually you might get a song on a project that you wrote, meaning me. And then you can maybe arrange and, write some horns or some strings, orchestration, which I did a lot of that. I also had an 18-piece big band, did 2 big band albums, which very few people are into big bands, but it was a good proving ground for me, writing new songs all the time and arranging them.
Now, hold on. So what does that mean?
Well, I mean, just in terms of experience, the traditional big band like Duke Ellington or Buddy Rich or Stan Kenton, that kind of a thing, where it's, 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, 5 saxophones, and a rhythm section.
A big band.
So, yeah. So I actually formed a band. It actually started in the Musicians Union in Santa Ana, California. And we would meet weekly, and it would be a great place for me to try out new charts, also in the college bands, new arrangements, we call them charts, and found great players that way, and developed skills in terms of orchestrating, which came in handy much later.
Right.
On more pop-oriented records and things. So, And I was always doing my own project. I would end up usually writing about an album, which is what we called it, an album's worth of material every year or so. And I got that a bit of a break with the first two big band albums, and then I switched over to what was called Quiet Storm, which was sort of R&B oriented.
Yeah.
And then was called The Wave, 94.7 The Wave. That was all across the country. And then now they've changed it to the term yacht rock, which I just absolutely can't stand. But
Yacht
that is kind
rock.
Yeah, that was kind of the niche. So, but again, more R&B oriented, R&B fusion jazz when I was doing it than what some of that is now on the boat, as they say.
When was this this Quiet Storm era? Because I remember being a kid in middle or high school, and at a certain time of night, maybe they just stole the phrase, maybe it has nothing to do with it, but at a certain time of night, your favorite radio station would switch over to the Quiet Storm, and then just the whole tempo of everything would change.
Absolutely, yeah. No, that's it. More often at night. Trying to remember, I think KJLH, I think, was one station in the LA area. And yeah, a lot of those stations developed across the country. And it was, again, R&B oriented. They started to have vocals, and West Coast sound is what they also called it. And that was people like Al Jarreau and Steely Dan, of course. Those kinds of groups, Larry Carlton, just jazz oriented pop music, really.
So if it's West Coast, is that called gangster jazz?
Could be. Maybe on the Quiet Storm stations. I don't know. No, smooth jazz, I'm afraid, but I always try to rise above that a little bit too, and get a little bit more complex in the voicings and the writing and the arrangements and all that. So, but yeah, that's kind of what I was doing. So I ended up, I don't know, I guess I have about 15 albums. I don't really count.
15?
Yeah, of my own. And then I was working on other albums all the time for people. And I keep saying albums, maybe 8 tracks or cassettes or vinyl or those CDs that were so hot and up and coming and now are long gone. But so I had product out pretty consistently until the mid 80s, when the top 10 album that you just mentioned, that was on the Billboard Charts and Cashbox magazine.
Congratulations.
Half a year. Thank you. Yeah, it's on my wall and my wife appreciates it.
So going from the 70s to the mid to late 80s, with the jazz and the sounds changing with the Quiet Storm and some of the kind of the R&B style flows, how is it? Were you able to just kind of sit back and watch it just slowly changing over time, or did it kind of, for the most part, stay the same with some added new flavor? And then, compare that to now, because those are some of the sounds, some of the music I remember from being a kid, whether I was watching a TV show, like Miami Vice or something, where the music controls the tempo way more than people ever actually realize. To now, you don't really, even movies, unless it's a big score, they don't seem to feature any of those emotional scene to scene transitional sounds.
Yeah, I think you're right. Jan Hammer, I think did the music from Miami Vice.
Yeah,
it's very electric or whatever. There's always change. That's the thing that's great, and it's also frustrating. Things just keep evolving, and again, they might get a little simpler and softer, and they'll have one label attached to them, and then some couple people will have a hit more in the R&B field, as we discussed, and
right.
It'll have just a little bit more of a funk kind of feel to it. And of course, I was pretty heavily involved with arranging, music orchestration for humans that all arrived at the studio at the same time, and we created something live, which was very fun. Just the human aspect. It's like a car meet or whatever else. You wouldn't want to be there alone with a computer all the time. So then all of a sudden synthesizers came along, and all that stuff went away. People kind of stopped recording those things in LA, and they went to maybe Eastern Europe to record, or maybe Canada because it was cheaper, or they just played it with one finger on a synthesizer.
And we're talking what, mid 80s?
Yeah, probably. Let's see, what has it been? Yeah, maybe early 80s. Yeah, I started, the Moog synthesizer, and then Roland came on strong from Japan, and Korg, and all the different companies. So luckily, I embraced that after being scared to death watching the calls go away, and just kind of included that as part of what I do, and hopefully, the orchestration and the arranging aspect helped me to be a little different than some that just put their right hand down and started playing whatever they heard.
Right.
Yeah.
So was that the call slowdown. Excuse me. So is that kind of one of those big signs like, the significance is going away? Maybe I'm not evolving with the music enough. What am I going to do next? Are those some of the things that kind of crept in? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, definitely that. And of course, it was even worse for some of the players. I mean, how would you like to be a trombone player who was doing Earth, Wind, and Fire dates and, film scores all the time, and then all of a sudden there's just none of that because you can, again, push it on a synthesizer and make that sound. But so, yeah, I mean, everybody was running scared. It wasn't unlike COVID in some ways, because all of a sudden, things just changed instantly, and everybody kind of evolved and had to make adjustments, and Zoom came in, and it's kind of the same thing. But if I hadn't really embraced synthesizers, I think I would have had to go to work and ask if they want fries with that burger or something.
Right. So were you always able to, like, once you started landing your albums and finding, like, were you always busy enough to where you didn't have to have a regular day job? You didn't have to sell aluminum siding, Monday through Friday from 8 to 3, and then work in the studio from 3:30 to 12?
Yeah, pretty much. I did fall into something quite a bit later that I did by choice, which was I worked at a biotech company, but I kept doing the music all along. But it was actually the number one independent biotech company in the world, but it was with technology. I was in the IT department. And at the time, they actually used Macintosh computers, which I used in music. So that was actually a whole lot of fun. And I understood then what, benefits or insurance, or when people said, have a good weekend, I said, oh, that's right, I'm off, because usually I would just be working the weekend. But it's feast or famine. I can't say I was always thrilled with the flow, the evenness of it, and I did, touring with some major groups, and I would do that for a while, and then that would end or go away, and then something else would come up, and you wait by the phone, and hopefully it happens. But yeah, I always made it work with just pretty much that.
And those are kind of some of the beyond the glory things. Have you done a lot of collaborations? Who have you toured with? Any super big names that are just unmistakable unless you were born yesterday?
Well, again, my unmistakable it's sometimes a little harder, but yeah, I spent 4 decades with Pat Boone. I think we talked about that on the phone the other day, but he was a peer to Elvis Presley, and actually Elvis even opened the show for Pat. So that shows you how big Pat was, even though not too many people know him as much. But I did that. And then at the time, they had a family show with his 4 daughters, one of whom was Debbie Boone. And while we were just starting out on the road, there was this song called You Light Up My Life. And with the movie of the same name, Mike Curb was involved with that and started going up the charts, and shockingly went all the way to number 1 and stayed there longer than almost any record. Maybe that's before Taylor Swift or something, but it was a smash, huge hit worldwide. So that made her a star. We started doing the Tonight Show. Pat would guest host even sometimes. It was for Johnny Carson back then, or maybe Leno, and the Midnight Special with Wolfman Jack, the Pat Boone family specials, Christmas, Easter, all that stuff. Because in his heyday, he had a weekly television show called The Chevy Show, obviously sponsored by Chevrolet, with massive stars. I mean, Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie, Nat King Cole, just everybody. He would be doing duets with them. He was a big star, a really big star. And he just turned 90 and he's still out there doing things. So got to hand it to him. But then I also toured with a couple other big groups. Richie Furay, who was in the gold or platinum selling group called Buffalo Springfield, which spawned, it was Jim Messina, which became Loggins and Messina later. And then it was with Stephen Stills and Neil Young, who became Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. When Richie left at that time, he formed Poco, which was a huge group. And then a group called the Southern Hillman Furay Band. And then he became a solo artist. And at that point, he was actually, the Buffalo Springfield was like my favorite group in junior high school.
Okay.
So touring and writing songs with him. And I was able to work on 4 albums. And I would just look from the stage there over at Richie and realize, gosh, this is that guy I was just eating up in junior high school. And here I am on the road. So
dream come true.
Yeah. Yeah. So some of that stuff, and got a taste of it all, I guess. But I always kind of wanted to be in the studio and sort of be home, at normal hours. I wasn't a big drug addict or anything else, so I just like to have a normal life and enjoy the music part, which luckily I was able to do for the most part. So,
were you a little drug addict?
No, not at all, really. Okay, I tried pot when I was listening to Buffalo Springfield in junior high school a few times, but no.
Pot. You're showing your age, David.
Yeah, I know. Blow, what is it?
Yeah, pot was the thing as well for me growing up. It was like, dude, you smoke pot? Yeah, it's funny.
Cannabis, I don't know.
Right,
CBD.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite tour story or a night story? Some crazy thing that had happened when you guys are playing, whether it's just somewhere local or somewhere on the road that you can share with us?
Yeah. Actually, there are a few of them, but Pat is a multimillionaire, and they're different. He gets stopped speeding in his Cobra or one of his others, his Rolls Royce or something, and they just want his autograph. They don't. Sure. They're not worried about it. They know who he is, most of them, or they did at least. But once I was actually playing guitar initially on the road with him. I've always played a little of each. And I had my road cases, long guitar case, and then the amp was in a road case. And we were waiting in an airport somewhere, and all these things were coming out. It did not come. So I was standing there. Actually, Pat was there too at the time. And I said, I'm waiting for my guitar. I don't know. I think, it kind of turned off for a minute. I think it might be stuck or something. So Pat Boone, the #1 hit selling TV star, movie star, just gets up on that, whatever they call it, roundabout, and he climbs up into the inner bowels of the airport, and he's gone for 6-7 minutes. They call the cops, and sure enough, my amp and guitar come floating down. And once again, the cops arrived, the airport cops, I guess, and just wanted his autograph and said, now, you really can't do that. You can't climb up into the mechanism there.
That's funny.
But he did get my guitar. And there's a lot of them like that. It wasn't when we were on the road, but he told us about it. He got a bad review once, and they sent a little surprise on the plane to the reviewer in an airsick bag, and I can let you guess what might have been in it.
I'll use my imagination.
But yeah, he was quite a nut. He was a lot of fun, and he still is. He's a pretty amazing guy, and he's 14 years old in his mind, so he's got more energy than I do. But
so what is David Diggs doing today? We've kind of talked through some of the heydays of the 70s and the mid to late 80s. Your discography goes pretty far. And do you have something, like, what are you doing now? Do you have another record? Are you still kind of playing around? Because I thought I saw maybe you have something on your website, daviddiggs.com.
Yeah. Well, the last one is, well, first of all, my daughter, Rachel Diggs, that's her music name at least, had a big song on the ABC Family show. Maybe I told you, I don't know, but
No.
Pretty Little Liars.
Oh,
it was
wow.
a massive kids show or
Oh,
whatever.
yeah. My daughter watched it.
Yeah, yeah. And she had a big song on that, on the pilot, actually. It ran twice in a row for an hour, and then it was in the show later, too. It was, I mean, she was being tweeted about literally all over the world. And so she started singing in my group as well, my jazz-oriented group. And so eventually we were able to do a CD called Black Coffee, which is the American Songbook stuff. That was actually on Pat Boone's label. And I was able to, which is very rare, I was able to call the most famous, expensive players on earth. And there's no substitute. You know, it's just, I mean, guys I loved working with and or had admired my whole life. So that album has been out for a while. It's available everywhere. And that's the last artist project I guess I've done. Although I just a week or two or three ago had 3 of my albums from the 80s and 90s come out on a Japanese label called Pfenning. So those are being re-released with cool covers with the kanji characters down the right, you know, the little label ribbon thing they do. And so that stuff's fun, but I'm still working. I'll get a call. I can do a lot of it over the internet now, like everything else. I did a thing not long ago for Roger Williams. He was a massive star piano player. He had a lot of number 1 hits. One of them was Born Free from the movie. And Autumn Leaves was another, his version. And he had written a song for his daughter. And she actually wrote lyrics to that song and had heard my Black Coffee album with Rachel, my daughter. And she thought it would be great to have some original clips from him and then have Rachel sing this new song, which I arranged. So, you know, I did that with her a couple years ago. And Rachel did a duet with Pat Boone a couple years ago, the big Enya song, Only Time it's called. I believe that sold 80 million albums back then.
Yeah, I spent some time in front of my computer monitor watching the old Windows or Windows Media Player or Winamp or whatever do its little graphics. I may or may not have been in a normal state of mind, but I think everybody knows that famous Enya song.
Yeah. Well, if you get a massage anywhere, you know it, right? So, you know, I do stuff like that. I do have one completely new song that came out on like a bonus track on one of these 3 in Japan. And we play live. I spent most of my life in LA, and then we just moved to Idaho 3 years ago, partly to be near the daughter I just was talking about, who has 5 grandkids of ours, and then they promptly moved 8 hours north, which is what they do. You know, they do different things. So,
right. Where in Idaho are you?
We're in Eagle, which is basically Boise.
I know exactly where Eagle is. Yeah. I stayed at the Hilton Garden Inn there, right next to Bardenay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, you know, Wes Tankersley, which you know from online, a dear friend of mine, co-host on One Drink Wednesday, he's out there too, and I think Caldwell or Boise or something, but spends a lot of time in Eagle. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Well, then you know, yeah. But so we got out of town, and again, we could only do it because of the way things are now. So we've played quite a few times here. We did the Eagle Jazz Festival a couple of years in a row. And there's a lot of restaurants and little clubs that have music almost every night of the week here, which is sort of interesting. You know, it's a lot more to do in some ways than Los Angeles.
Right. So. A lot easier to get to things.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Yeah. And so who are you a big fan of these days, other than what you've talked about? Is there somebody out there that you kind of, you know, binge their music every once in a while, or if they have something, you check into it, even if they've been around for as long as you or half as long as you?
Yeah. You know, it's almost hard to answer, but
right.
I like all the usual suspects, people like Herbie Hancock or Miles Davis product, at least. The Brecker brothers, Michael Brecker is one of my absolute favorites. Pat Metheny, Yellow Jackets. There's just a lot of them. And of course, I listen to the radio, such whatever you want to call it, XM radio, I guess now, not terrestrial.
Right.
And I like a lot of things, and I try to stay in touch. But I really love jazz, and with a tinge of classical or whatever else, R&B, Earth, Wind and Fire, all these groups.
Good.
Just everybody, really.
Good, solid yacht music. Right.
Well, Steely Dan, but not so many others.
Where do you think that label comes from, that genre of yacht music? Because when you say that, I just imagine a 45 to 60 foot yacht, people kind of having a wine and cheese spread and just kind of listening to music that's not too heavy.
Yeah, I think it came about for various reasons. The California or the West Coast sound contributed, but a lot of these artists do those cruises. Dave Koz and Jonathan Butler, who was a big star out of South Africa. I did work on 4 albums with him. An amazing guy. He was initially styled a lot after Stevie Wonder. Good guitar player, just great writer, all that stuff. But so he's on all those, cruises, literally Catalina Island cruise. And so I think that contributed. And then there were a few conspicuous hits, like, I hate to even say it, but like Brandy. You remember that song at all? Brandy, you're a fine girl. What a good wife. Anyway, I should.
No. Keep singing. It might come to me.
Anyway, it's clearly yacht rock sound. And then they brought in like Toto and Boss Skaggs and a lot of.
I'm actually very familiar with that. Yeah.
Yes.
I think like every kid, I had the Toto album.
Yeah, and a lot of that
cassette. Sorry, cassette.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have some of those if you ever need them. My own product here.
No, I'm definitely going to get some of your stuff, or maybe more of your stuff, because you're available all over the place. We'll talk about it in a few minutes. Want to talk about cars at all?
Yeah.
Let's switch to cars here. Your story is awesome, and I'm glad that we were able to connect, and I can't wait to see you here in a few months at NSX Expo.
Likewise.
Yeah, it'll be a great time. So let's talk about EVs a little bit, because that's what everyone's into right now. The 2035 mandate, whether that's going to happen or not, very doubtful. But EVs and hybrids. What have you had, and what is your overall opinion, I guess? And there's a lot to probably unpack there. So what do you have, or what have you had?
Yeah, I've had actually at least 5 that I can remember, either hybrid or plug-in hybrid or full electric over the last probably 15 years or whatever it's been. I think the first one I had was a Civic hybrid, which was a good little car. And
that's a little thing, right? Not that little.
Well, it's a Honda Civic.
Yeah,
so,
but
yeah,
okay,
it's a 4-seater or something. Yeah. And that was a pretty good car. It was my introduction to hybrid. And I had a Prius at one point. I was rear-ended by a Ford F-150 who was texting. So that eliminated that. Yeah. But that was a good car too. I'd probably still have it if not. And then I had the Ford C-Max, which I could put my equipment in the back of. Kind of a little SUV-ish plug-in hybrid. A lot of the time, I could make it just on the electric part after plugging it in.
Never heard of that thing.
Range of like 30-mile range or something. And then I guess I might be forgetting one at the moment, but then I had the all-electric Chevy Spark, which was a Korean joint venture, I guess, and that became the Bolt.
I think it's tiny, isn't it?
It is. It's really tiny.
Yeah.
And the Volt is also one I had later, so it's at least 5. And of course, the NSX that I have now is a hybrid, technically. But the Spark was actually kind of cool. I leased it. I remember it was $199 a month, nothing down. I drove it back and forth to Pat Boone's office from Agora Hills, which is a good 2-3 hours round trip a lot of the time. I charged a little bit at home, and I would charge there with the 220-volt chargers for free. And I literally drove almost free for 3 years. Then I turned it in. So that one was a pretty good experience.
I didn't hear Tesla come out of your mouth. Is there any reason why, other than they have just a crazy price tag?
Yeah, kind of more the crazy price tag. And honestly, to this day, I don't think I've even ridden in one. I've heard all about the Plaid and everything, and I should have, but it hasn't worked out. Yeah, I guess I wasn't that much of a fan, just kind of the way they looked. And, they were a startup at the time that I was noticing them. So just didn't, yeah.
What do you think then of, okay, so we'll go to the other part of that, this electrification movement. Do you think it's the right direction? What are yours? What does David Diggs think about the electrification movement right now?
Well, I was really all in for a long time. I almost even, about the time that I got the current NSX, which was my third, I was almost putting money down for the Cayman electric, which will be 2025 and onward unless things change. But, there's all these discussions, and I think they're true, about the grid, obviously, duh. It needs
Right.
electricity. And then where the materials are sourced in terms of, labor in other countries and mining and just all those issues. So I'm not seeing, we talk about it a lot. I meet several guys every morning at Starbucks here in Eagle, and we talk about it all the time. And some of them are a bit older than I, so they want ICE, they want an internal combustion engine. I'm kind of in the middle. The NSX, as you know, is such an amazing combination of both technologies. And I guess the new Corvette is finally catching up to that idea.
That E-Ray is supposedly amazing, so
I'm sure.
But it should be, right? It's taken our technology in the NSX that was arguably already a generation old by the time we got it in 17. And it's built on top of that. So by every measurable possible, it should be a better vehicle.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I didn't have to.
Yeah. It's all right, I'm allowed to. It's true though. That's what they say. But you said this is let's back up a second. This is your third NSX. Are they all the NC1 2017 Plus platform, or did you have like an early NA1, NA2?
I had two of the early ones in the 90s. 92 and then 94, which I wrote about in this little article for the NSX Club magazine, which perhaps will come out. I don't know.
It'll come out. It'll come out.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I didn't know what the schedule was or anything, but yeah, it's, I bought lots of cars and sold and got a new idea. I was pretty much the crazy car guy. And usually at the time, those were expensive too. And I got rid of the second one, and kind of a funny story, which again is in that article if it comes out. But I sold the 94, which was a wonderful Brooklands green with tan interior, which I loved and still do actually, because I hit something on the freeway going to hear my daughter sing. And it wasn't a person or anything or an animal, but just the whole front end kind of came down. And I just thought, this is just too expensive, and the costs, and of course in California, the insurance, everything. So like a fool, I got rid of it. And then I missed it so much, and I was walking along the car lot dealerships there in Westlake Village near Agora, where I lived. And I looked up, and there was my car.
Oh, wow.
So when I went in to rebuy it, and that was an interesting discussion with my wife, of course. Remember that green car we just had 3 months ago? And I went in to buy it. They wanted proof of insurance, and I handed her my old, which was still current, my proof of insurance on that exact green NSX. So she looked at me, looked down at the number, looked up again, looked down. She just couldn't figure out what was going on. I said, yeah, that's the car. I'm buying it again. So Anyway, crazy stories. But and then I actually had an Honda S2000 after that, which was kind of a cousin, I felt, to those cars. So
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know that 94, a lot of people don't realize this, especially people listening to this, although there's going to probably be a few NSX owners that will consume this podcast, but that's a rare car, a 94 coupe. That's a rare car.
Mm-hmm.
And especially that color, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not the first color a lot of people picked also on the NC one either, but I've always loved that combination. So
yeah, that was
my regret.
Yeah, it wasn't white, black, or silver. And so, that made it even more desirable for a lot of people. And what the mid 90s is when a lot of car manufacturers started experimenting with their colors. So then everybody came out with some sort of a green, right? Or some sort of a purple, or I guess Ford had like that weird fusion. I don't know what the color is, but everybody listening probably knows what I'm talking about. So it's kind of a weird time. Would you, so with the current NSX that you have now, I think we were discussing the other day, it's a 2020?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You loving it?
I am. Yeah, absolutely. It's not finicky. It's just so great. And there's so much going on. It makes me a little nervous. For example, this recall that I'm trying to get in on here, things like that make me a little nervous once in a while, but to me, it's so elegant. And there's an element that's just so Honda about it, which to me is a compliment. That's really what I wanted to come back to. And yeah, it's a highlight of my life for sure these days.
All right. So we can reverse this back because I kind of took a sidebar and went down the NSX road. So as far as the EV versus the hybrid technology, where do you, because I support EVs as well, but I'm unsure of really what the future holds with them, regardless of how they're sourced and stuff. I think a lot of people look at that and say it's just like Blood Diamond, right? Blood Diamond came out, and I don't think that really stopped anyone from buying diamonds. It was just kind of the in thing to kind of oppose it. Even though personally, it sucks, but I'm still probably going to buy a diamond, right? And I'm probably going to buy an EV, regardless of how the technology, the materials are sourced. But with that being said, in the grid problems, do you think we can actually hit that, or do you think we should probably take a look at just improving our hybrid technology?
Well, I've said quite a bit that, it seems like the hybrid technology is kind of the best of everything. Although you're still going to have gas stations for the most part, and you're still going to have the electronic aspect. But, the instant improvement in mileage, no matter which mode you're in, I guess you're going to still have some of the repairs you wouldn't have if it was a pure electric. No oil changes was fun for 3 years in that Spark. And just, fewer moving parts. Of course, nothing anybody can really repair on their own anymore because everything's gotten so complex in a good way for the most part. And then I have to say, I went to a couple of Porsche events where they invited us to drive the Taycan, the electric car. And there's something about it that just really does remind me, not the Porsche in, specifically, but just a little bit like driving a vacuum cleaner or something. It's so fast and so easy to make that happen. But there's an element that I'm missing, I think, now more than ever. So yeah, there's a lot of questions, and obviously it'll have to do with, I'm sure, the election coming up and who wins or how that all goes too. I've always been suspect. I think it was even 2030 for a while, and now whatever 2035. I've seen some pushback, as you have, from various companies. I guess Europe's all in, it seems, but I think it remains to be seen. I don't know.
Right. I could tell you, having driven that Porsche and had driven one of the Teslas in a Model 3, which people could easily tell me that's hardly a Tesla. But, having driven both of those, the Porsche feels not only more refined, but feels like a normal car in a good way. So, if you've never been in or driven a Tesla, you'd only set yourself up for disappointment having driven that Porsche.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So let's, you kind of brought it up. You kind of brought up talking about the election a little bit. And I think one of the biggest things, and I'm going to start doing this, I started with another episode and just kind of asking up until that point, because there's a lot of transportation related questions that most people never know about when you're deciding what's important to you in your local state and even on the federal level, because they don't really talk about that on TV. All you hear really is, should EVs, or are we going to hit that EV target in 2035? Because that's the one big thing, which, by the way, is a question that's not even on this part of the quiz on isidewith.com political quiz.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not even on here. But there are a couple of them. So I figured if we can pick and choose maybe two or three. One of the ones that I had asked recently, and I'm going to ask you what your opinion on this. And I will tell you, it's not going to affect you in Eagle, Idaho. I can promise you this question wouldn't affect you there. But it would have affected you 100% in California, and as well as maybe the main road in Boise, which, again, I'm not quite sure it would be that effective in that area the last time I was there. But the question is, should cities implement congestion pricing to reduce traffic in busy urban areas? And to me, this sounds like a toll lane or a toll road.
Yeah. If it's kind of what they either are doing or we're talking about doing in New York and other areas, I don't like that idea so much. But if it's a toll road, like in Orange County, California, where you can choose to get on it if you want to, I think that's great. I'm not sure I like to be forced to do anything. And it's probably worth paying for. I guess I would say that my couple of GPSs are set to avoid toll roads. But growth brings congestion and traffic. So I would say whatever needs to be done, but as long as, it's nice if there's an option, some freedom, and not that, and I think if you decide to give, so to speak, to that effort, that's great. Just being forced I'm not as crazy about that idea. So,
you brought up a pretty good point, and because I don't know, I would say even some of the places around California where I would drive and all of a sudden I would be on a toll road, had no idea.
Right.
They do that a lot without going through any booths or anything. You just see the little sign on the side of the road to pay your toll, text this. But I think, a listener can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when I was in Seattle earlier this year and we went up north, part of the highway, if not the entire thing, just all of a sudden was a toll road. And the way to get around it is you had to exit and go up the side streets, which in that way, I think that's an example of being kind of forced to do it.
Right.
Which seems a little crappy. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that similar thing happened to me. I was in Boston, I believe it was, and I hadn't printed out a MapQuest or something alternate. I'm going back on purpose.
MapQuest, this guy. I feel you.
Just for comedy.
Turn by turn.
Although they did used to print them for Pat Boone, but anyway. Yeah. So I went down, there was like this sort of underground tunnel, and I had no idea where I was. And I just didn't know for sure because the GPS couldn't work underneath the tunnel. And I finally just took a shot at going out someplace. And of course, I came out onto some toll road. I was in a rental car, and it said something about, I hope you have your, whatever it is, the little badge you pay for, the sticker on the windshield or on the bumper or whatever. And of course, I didn't. So I learned what that means. I got home, and a week or two later, I got this bill from the rental car company for this huge fine for not paying. So, that to me is just not very smart. Again, I don't mind paying or knowing about it and choosing it, but being stuck with it after the fact, I didn't care for that. So
that's a big one. And that reminds me, because the highway that I was talking about in Seattle wasn't even the one that you just remind me of. Years ago, when I first started doing my healthcare IT contracting, we had to take a trip from the Seattle area. I think we're in Renton, Washington, west. And we had to cross this really big bridge to get to these other cities. And that's a pay bridge. Like there's no other way. Yeah. You just have to pay to go across the bridge. And I didn't realize that. And of course, you get the ticket, so you have to pay the toll, then the whatever administration fee, and then whatever convenience fee that the rental car company decides in the contract to charge you. So that could be a very expensive ticket or toll fine, I guess.
Yeah, the same thing happened to us in France, I believe. And, there, if you're traveling on a Sunday, they may or may not have a human there to collect something. They only take certain credit cards, as I recall, and some just don't work. And I don't know about cash. It's just a lot of variables that make traveling harder. Unnecessarily, I think, generally. Could have been worked out differently. If they just listened to me.
The world would be a better place. I got one more for you, and we'll get you out of here. And I was wrong. This question does appear on here. And this isn't the question I'm going to ask you, but it is on here. Should the government require all new cars to be electric or hybrid by a certain date? I think everyone kind of agree on that. But here's one. Should cities designate special lanes for autonomous vehicles? So I don't think you have that there. I know California's pretty big on that, and Phoenix is really big on that because we have the Waymo system here, which are cars that essentially drive themselves with a remote operator somewhere monitoring the car. So should there be special lanes for autonomous vehicles?
Wow. I do like easy listening, so to speak, reading about that subject. I'm certainly not an expert at all. What concerns me is what would concern everybody, at least in the beginning, is just unintended consequences of, the car driving through somebody's house, which I guess some of the Tesla Cybertrucks have been doing.
Jeez.
So I don't know if a lane in itself would address that problem. It would seem like a good idea. And again, it's a economy of scale, whatever issue. If there's only one or two self-driving autonomous cars, and you have a whole lane that's reserved only for that wouldn't seem to make too much sense. But I think I don't know, we're kind of in another, industrial computer revolution type thing. I think it's really going to be interesting to watch. I'm glad I'm not the one that has to come up with all the answers. Just Elon Musk, he has to do it. So I'll follow him or not.
No, I think that's an excellent response or answer, I would say, and it does make a lot of sense. When we were in Europe recently, Barcelona, they have, and we may have these in some cities too. I'm thinking maybe New York City, but I don't remember. But there were lanes that were only for buses and taxis, and then the rest of the lanes were for the rest of the commuters. So, I mean, but obviously when you have buses and a ton of taxis, then you have the justified traffic. Although I would argue that maybe it would make more sense if it's a specific time of the day other than 24/7, and maybe it is. But so daviddiggs.com. And first off, how often are you confused with the other David Diggs? There's an African-American David Diggs that's also a singer. It's David, is that how it is?
Well, David Diggs. He was in Hamilton.
I see. Yeah, he's an actor.
And when Hamilton took off, all my YouTube stuff got routed to him, and the search was totally messed up. And he's in another league for sure. I got an email a couple of days ago. Somebody went to my website and said, "Oh, I loved what you do." And it was like David, and I said, "That wouldn't be me."
Oh, that's right, David. Yeah, just like you were saying. Yeah, David Daniel Diggs. Yeah, I've seen this guy before, so that makes sense. Yeah. Still funny as hell.
He's an interesting guy for sure, but it's not me.
Yeah.
When you were a little offshoot here, but when you were in Barcelona, was there a big, amazing, ornate, round theater that you ran into? I don't remember then.
I don't recall. Maybe because and here's why I said maybe, because I know a lot of the Bull arenas, or whatever they're actually really called,
hmm
that was outlawed, and so they've turned them into theaters and things. So it could have been one of those.
Actually, it was, yeah, it could be, I guess. Well, I think it's got a roof and everything, of course. But the reason I mention it is the Brecker Brothers, maybe my favorite musical group of all time, did a immortal live concert there, which was at the time a laser disc, and later became other forms of video and an album, and just amazing album product. So I thought maybe you might have walked by it or something and seen that, but anyway, no big deal.
Maybe it's possible. There's so many ornate things over there on that side of the world that it's.
Yeah, you were there like 3 weeks, right, or something?
Yeah, between that and in Portugal, which by the way is at this specific time in late July is going through absolute hell. So I guess we got there at the right time. But there's so much beauty on the other side of the world. And it's just, there's things here that aren't there that I can see someone coming from another country to visit the United States would just have crazy marvel over. But there's, obviously there's things over there that are just so much older than half the stuff here. And that in itself is just amazing.
It really is. Yeah. Centuries or millennia. Mm-hmm. Yeah. As opposed to just, it's something being built right here in Eagle down
right
near the mall. Yeah. One other thing I was just going to mention, mainly for maybe the NSX listeners, if they find it interesting, the album, one of my last albums called Jazz Work, which you and I discussed about having a few available at the event, maybe, started as a surround sound DVD audio, and it's something only geeks would even know about. But Steely Dan was one of the very first to implement a DVD audio. That's actually the spec or whatever, DVD/A, because it was higher. It was 24-bit, probably 48K, I believe. It had room for high definition videos and interviews and photos and all that. Really an amazing format. And I slipped in on the ground floor. A partner of mine was doing all the surround sound mixes of major albums like Carole King's Tapestry from years before, Foreigner, Brain Salad Surgery by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and just so many classic albums. Dolby hired him to do these surround sound mixes. And anyway, that album it was called Eclectric of mine. It ended up on a new label called 5.1 Entertainment.
Oh.
And I thought I was in on the ground floor of this amazing thing. And indeed, that format was pretty much spearheaded by Elliot Shiner. And if you know the name, which not everybody's in love with the system, but all of the NSXs and TLs and everything from Acura use the ELS sound system. Mm-hmm. And that was, they actually put selections from my album, my DVD, surround sound, on their sampler for Acura, for Volvo, for Air Force 1 and 2, for Marantz, just a lot of systems. So I thought, I have arrived. I'm on this ground.
That's awesome, man.
Wonderful. And it sounds great and everything else. And guess what? Nobody cared. And they tried the dual disc, where they had that on one side and just a stereo on the other. And then that's even completely, just went away immediately because people want MP3s they can take to the beach,
Sure.
So that's the way it goes. But anyway, I just thought it'd be interesting because of the ELS that, pretty much come stock in the NSXs generally and have come from Acura for years.
So you just brought up something, and it was an unexpected question, but here it is. Have you found with all these improved technologies, or I wouldn't say improved technologies, but these additional ways to get music out, is it easier or more difficult than it's ever been, do you think, for musicians?
Well, it's definitely more difficult by far. I don't know if it's because of formats and things, but I mean, we all read, I'm sure, about how musicians really can't make any money anymore. The streams pay almost nothing. Mm-hmm. And of course, everybody can share it for free, which has been the case for quite a while. That was another one of those moments, like when they quit hiring real strings and horns and the whole Napster thing when it happened, and sharing music, giving it away, sending it to your friend. It was a real panic. But it's out of the bag, and that's what we have. So we sell T-shirts, I guess, at concerts. That's how we make a living now, I guess.
Man.
But it was a great format. The main thing I liked about it, and there's actually a new thing. Pro Tools and other companies are getting behind immersive audio, which is really the same thing. They had quad, where you had 4 speakers in the room, before 5.1 or 7.1. And then again, that dual disc idea, which was really the same thing. And now they're calling it immersive audio, where, fitting all kinds of music into a stereo mix that's really just the right blend or pull between the left and the right speaker is a chore. You have to use EQ and reverbs the right way and all that kind of stuff. And you still really can't hear everything you want to hear. Well, with the immersive, you can put it, kind of to the right, kind of to the left, kind of up on the ceiling, some things down kind of on the floor. I mean, it's just literally a 360 kind of thing. So I hope that does take off. We hear a lot of that still with movies, I guess. I don't really go to movies anymore outside the house, but I think that's still the promise of what we all wished would happen. And I still hope it does, because it's quite a format for music,
Yeah, I'll be looking out for that technology to increase, because for the stuff that you have done, I feel like that type of sound, just like a great movie score, is best consumed with the highest quality tools that are available, and I'm like millions of people, I used to go to Napster and Audio Galaxy and all those things, and LimeWire and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I used to dabble with mixing music, and I stopped doing that because there was just such a variance in quality that you would get. And when you mix a good quality song with a crappy one, you can tell immediately.
Yeah.
And so I just started buying all my music, whether it was $3 or sometimes $12 for one song, just so I'd have a quality wave format that I can experiment with. Yeah. And then, you see the impact on artists like yourself, and then it's like, all right, well, now that, because you remember in the 80s and the 90s, when you're buying an album, there might be one hit on there, but you're paying all this money for one song.
Right.
But now, the last 20 years, you can just buy a song. And so there's really no reason to just go and download stuff anymore. Illegally.
Yeah, it's good you mentioned that, because that is a good reason. And in terms of people who make music, we had to wait, might have had 3 hits that we thought were really great. We need to get them out, but we have to wait until you have 10 songs, and 7 of them might be filler, So EPs these days, and just 5 songs, you can throw it on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever, or a single, if you wanted to. So yeah, it's like everything. There's a freedom, and it's a more level playing field. But at the same time, there's so much music out there that I almost wish some of the suits at Columbia Records or Sony were there more involved at times, because they may not have been as musical, or I might have disagreed with some of the things they said, but at least they were kind of a filter. You ended up with big stars that were clearly talented and had hit songs more than maybe nowadays, when everybody can throw it out there. So
right. Well, good deal, man. We could talk for forever. We'll continue this conversation at NS Expo. For all of our NSX listeners, hopefully you've enjoyed this episode with David Diggs, and hopefully you go to NS Expo and you can meet him in person. Otherwise, follow him on on daviddiggs.com. And where else can we find you? You're also David Diggs just on social media, yeah?
Yeah, definitely Facebook and Instagram mainly, and I'm in all the groups, and I'm actually friending every NSX person I can find too, and it's been great to begin to know a few people, and
it's a great community.
Yeah, definitely is. Glad to be back.
Sounds good, man. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Jay. I really had a good time. Appreciate it.
One of the thank David for joining the show. That conversation, just like every conversation, is brought to you by Cell Shop, an Arizona-based retailer that strives to be your destination of choice for wireless services, whether Arizona, Washington State, California, Texas, and Florida. They are an authorized AT&T dealer, so visit them at cellshop.us and get connected today. Like we said, if you're an NSX owner, hopefully you're going to NS Expo. Registration has been extended to August 16th. You will need to be a member of the club. Only costs $50, nsxca.org. We will see David there. I want to thank Right Honda and Right Toyota, Toyota of Huntington Beach, Claremont Toyota, and Gardenia Honda, FoilOnline.com, the aforementioned Cell Shop Wireless Services, AutoCannon, officially licensed Honda and Acura Gear, Patreon business supporter, Automotive Specialty Tool out of Owings Mills, Maryland, Koya Automotive out of Winter Garden, Florida, Pell Construction out of Caledonia, Michigan, Beak House Small Home Design out of Ashburn, Virginia, and Traverse City, Michigan, and Shaping Success with West Tankersley out of Boise, Idaho. If you're in position of the podcast upgrade, join the Patreon for as little as $3 a month. You get access to bonus audio as well as show swag. That is Patreon, Hard Parking Podcast. Special thanks to Mark Stoneman, Catherine Cox, Eddie Ramos, Richard Graves, Byron Jones, Bo Jung, Alice Kamina, Drew Bunkley, and Yasser Chiba. Follow me on Instagram at Pfenning. Join the Hard Parking Violations Facebook group. Join the Hard Parking channel. If you want to see me in all sorts of controversies, you can also follow me on X at Pfenning. But remember, I can't grow without you telling the world how great this show is. Let's do this. Let's grow this thing together, and I will talk to you all next week.
Shut up!